like to welcome everyone to Living Lakes Canada's annual general meeting. It is now started, and so I will hand it over to our host for the evening, our board chair, Jane Fleet.
Wonderful. Thanks, Emily. So my name is Jane Fleet. I am the chairperson for the Living Lakes Board, and thank you everybody for taking time on this Thursday evening to participate in our AGM. Just a few housekeeping issues before we get started. We are recording the meeting, and we can send folks a link if requested. So, and if you would like that, just write that in the chat. We would love it if you ask questions. It can be either during the particular section, or it can be at the end during the Q&A. And you can either raise your hand, raise your Zoom hand, or write it in the chat. Either one. Will be monitoring both throughout the session. There are some times during the meeting when we will be voting. If you are not a Living Lakes member, just bear with us during those times. If you are a member, you should have been sent some documentation earlier this week. Things like last year's minutes and some write-ups on our new board of directors, our new board members that are going to be elected. So only members can vote, and we ask that you raise your arm during that voting process. If you do get disconnected, we're going to just simply ask you to reconnect. I think with that, I'm going to pass to Claire Armstrong, our Applied Reconciliation Coordinator, to give the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Jane. Good evening, everyone. I want to start our AGM this evening off by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples whose lands we're joining this virtual meeting from, as well as the lands that Living Lakes Canada's water stewardship is carried out on. So today I'm joining from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of Squamish Nation. And to me, that means that I recognize that the land that supports me is land that's been cared for by Squamish Nation in a relationship handed down from generation to generation. And it's land that wasn't turned over in any agreement or treaty to the Crown. And I also want to acknowledge that Living Lakes Canada's water stewardship work is carried out on traditional territories across what is now known as Canada, so many different Indigenous peoples. And this acknowledgement means that we understand the role and the responsibility that Indigenous peoples across Canada have to this land and the water that flows through it. And we respect that relationship by uplifting their voices in water stewardship. So this land acknowledgement is a moment for us to reflect on the role that we all have in reconciliation between settlers and Indigenous peoples, as well as reconciliation between all people and the land and the waters that provide us with wealth. And as we transition into the rest of the AGM this evening, this lens of reconciliation really remains the foundational lens that's applied to all of our work. And so with that, I'll pass it back to Jane.
Thanks, Claire. So the first thing on our agenda is just to make a comment that we do have quorum tonight. We just require 5 voting members, and we have a lot more than that this evening, which is terrific. For those who are members and received the agenda, if there are no amendments to the agenda, can I ask for a motion to approve the agenda as written? Maybe I can't see everybody, so maybe
I'll approve. It's Mandy.
Okay, so Mandy McRobbie approving, and can I ask for a seconder?
I'll second.
I can second Andy Miller.
And Andy Miller, seconder. All those in favor? And the motion is passed. Thanks. The next is to go over the 2022 AGM minutes, which you would have been sent if in the documentation earlier this week. If there are no amendments to those minutes, can I ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the 2022 AGM?
I'll move that. It's Laura.
Okay, Laura Bell, and a seconder.
I'll second it,
Second,
Scott.
Paul Bell. Yeah.
Scott
Oh.
Meekin, second, and all those in favor? Great, motion is passed. And there is no unfinished business from last year's AGM. So I will move on to my report. First, I would like to acknowledge that I am giving my report from the traditional unceded territories of the Ktunaxa and Secwepemc nations and the chosen home of the Métis. In doing so, I recognize that we are in an ongoing process of learning from the nations that have stewarded these lands for generations. This has been a very busy year for our Living Lakes board. As our organization has been growing, we also felt that the board needed to grow and diversify. We had a recruitment drive in the late summer and fall, and there was a number of applicants of very high quality, and I feel like that speaks to the quality of our organization. As a result, we have 4 talented new directors, Ramsha Ahmed, Elizabeth Hendricks, Devin Anderson, and Ann Muter, who we will be electing in later in the meeting. As well, part of the board's work has been to work with the team on a strategic plan for the next 3 years. This well-structured, clear plan helps us as a board to see the bigger picture and support our organization in decisions that move us forward towards our vision of healthy watersheds for all living things. We as a board and you as stakeholders can be certain that our organization's finances are well cared for. As with any NGO, there's always uncertainty around future funding. Our development team is working hard and has over $5 million in pending grants. With the provincial election coming in October, the provincial funding commitments have stalled, but with regular financial forecast meetings and cash flow reports, Living Lakes has a very robust strategy for guiding financial management. It's really exciting to see the Foreshore Integrated Management Planning Indigenous Knowledge and Values Framework that was piloted on Nicola Lake in the Upper Nicola watershed is gaining traction, and it's also being applied to other lakes in the province. This was the project that was presented at our 2022 AGM. And this is just one of the many exciting projects that are going forward. It's not going unnoticed. We have in 2023 been the recipients of multiple awards, including the Kootenay Conservation Program Conservation Leadership Award, the North American Lake Management Society Appreciation Award for Advancements in Lake Management Technologies, and the Canadian Open Data Society Open Data Quality Award. The one that I think stands out to me the most, however, is when we were in the top finalist category in Charity Village Awards for the best nonprofit employer for youth advancement in businesses over 20 staff. And why it stands out to me is because I remember when we had 4 staff. And so we have grown tremendously. The organization continues to be led by our dynamic and visionary executive director, Kat Hartwick, being supported by the efficient, organized, and ever adaptable Andy Miller, our deputy director, and our capable senior management team. At this time, I would also like to thank our board members, new and old, for volunteering their time to help steward Living Lakes. I would particularly like to mention Jen Taberge, who will be stepping down from her role as board director after several years of dedicated and thoughtful service. Thanks, Jen. We're going to miss you and your words of wisdom at our meetings. Our team is a collaboration that works tirelessly to shape the future of Living Lakes Canada and pursue excellence in the promotion of watershed health, and it continues to be an honor to serve on the board for an organization of such high caliber. Thanks very much. I'd now like to hand over to Paul Bach, our treasurer, and Brian Duffett, our finance manager, to go over the 2022-23 financial statements.
Hey,
And
Jane. I'm just going to let Brian go right into it. I think he's got it very well organized, and so we'll let Brian take over.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jane. Jane, that Vancouver Grizzlies retro jersey gets my vote as the best Zoom backdrop I've seen this year. So kudos on that one. Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen here in a moment. My name's Brian Duffett. I'm the finance manager for Living Lakes Canada. Been in this position now for almost 2 years, which is it sounds crazy. Time is flying, and I just wanted to mention that good news. We had another strong financial year this year. This report is reporting on the year ending November 30th. So we're going back in time a little bit with these numbers. It was a 14-month fiscal year. That's also important. Usually they're 12, but we changed our year end this year to accommodate some of the demands of our team a little bit. So we switched from a September 30th year end to a November 30th year end. So that was something we had to maneuver with our auditor. Anyways, the auditor has prepared the financial statements. They're available on our website. I'm going to speak to them very briefly tonight before we get to the good presentation. And I'm always available for questions or a finance conversation if anyone wants to go there. So let me share my screen and we can get through this. Okay, so we get a nice big PDF of audited financials, and then for the purposes of this presentation, I try and condense it down into something valuable that we can share on a slide and get some information out of to see how the financial year went. So this is what we've done. This is our funding for the year end. So we were at $3.4 million this year. That's the most Living Lakes. That's the largest Living Lakes has ever been. And this pie chart sort of shows where $3.4 million comes from. And it mostly comes from government, 61%. Second place, foundations, 28%. We have other sources at 7%. And then there's donations there getting a 1% slice of the pie, which seems like nothing, but 1% of 3.4 million is nothing to shake a stick at. So, and our donations continue to go up year over year as well, which is a measure of how we're sort of connecting with our individual supporters. So that's our funding. The next pie chart is our expenses, also 3.4 million, which is good. And the biggest, this chart sort of shows where we're allocating those resources. So the monitoring framework is at 37%, and that's the program that our presentation tonight is going to come from. Our second highest is our Lakes team at 26%. If anyone was on the AGM last year, you'll remember that our presentation last year was from our Lakes team. This year we're doing a monitoring framework. We've got rivers and tributaries at 14%, groundwater at 4%, administration 12.7%, and fundraising 6.3%. The next slide gets into the audited statements. So I've done enough how to run a slideshow webinars online to know that this is way too much information to put up on a slide. So I'll just try and point to a few important numbers. And the whole slide, the purpose of this is just to prove that these are our audited financial statements. They're available on our website. You can look at them more extensively there. But just for the purposes of this presentation, I'll just highlight a few important numbers. So right off the top, our cash is at 783,000. We've got short-term investment of 3.7 million. That's essentially what those two numbers mean is that money is going to be used to fund our operations in this current fiscal year. Our total assets are just over 5 million right here. And we've got deferred revenue of 3.8 million down here in liabilities and net assets. Finally, I'll point to unrestricted net assets here at the bottom of 800,000, which is, I like to call that our rainy day / emergency fund. So we continue to have a healthy emergency fund, and we're in a healthy financial position, which is something that we should be proud of. And I just wanted to mention that while I'm the finance manager for the team, one of the great things about Living Lakes is that all of our program managers take an active role in managing the financials for their individual programs, which is great. It helps us stay sustainable, and it makes my job a lot easier. So really, everyone on the team is doing some form of financial management, which I think is great, and I'm very appreciative of it. The last slide I've got to present is our statement of revenue and expenses for the fiscal year. So as I mentioned in the pie chart, this is basically those two pie charts in financial statement form. So 3.4 million here in revenue versus 3.376 in expenses. We actually had a net deficit on the year of 23,000, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Deficit doesn't need to sound the alarm bells. It just means that we're allocating resources to our projects, and we need more funding. So that's all that means. The two big expense lines, obviously, that stand out are professional and consulting fees at 1.2 million and wages and benefits at 1.6. Everything else is almost immaterial in relation to those two things. It makes sense. Our expenses are our people, and the people doing the work and running the programs, and we essentially have about a dozen other line items because accountants need to make themselves feel important and have lots of fancy details. But there we have it anyway. So that's the audited financial statement. I'll pass it back to Jane.
Thanks, Brian. There we go. Are there any questions or concerns about the financial statements at all? Either you can write them in the chat or raise your hand. I'll just have a look here. Doesn't look like it. Can I ask for a motion to accept the 2022-2023 financial statements as presented?
I'd like to make that motion. Thanks, Jane.
Okay, Paul Bach, and a seconder.
I'll second, Jane.
Okay, Scott Meakin, all those in favor? Opposed? Okay, motion is passed. At this point, we are going to carry out the re-election of directors, and we do that in two slates. We've got 4 directors that are going to be elected for a 2-year term and 4 directors for a 1-year term. And that does not indicate quality in any way, shape, or form. It is purely logistical so that we don't have a bunch of directors if they are ending their term. We don't have everybody turning over at the same time. So I would like to call an election for Laura Bell, Scott Meakin, Ann Muter, and Devin Anderson to be elected for a new 2-year term. So I wonder if I can ask for a motion for that, for those people to be elected for a 2-year term.
It's Mandy. I'll put the motion forward.
Okay, Mandy McRobbie. And a seconder,
I'll second.
Paul
Paul.
Bach. And all those in favor? Great. Anyone opposed? Okay, so we have Laura Bell, Scott Meakin, Ann Muter, and Devin Anderson as new and also re-elected directors. Welcome to Devin and Ann. They were part of our recruitment last year. And then for the 1-year slates, we have Mandy McRobbie, Elizabeth Hendricks, and Ramsha Ahmed. So can I ask for a motion to elect Mandy, Elizabeth, and Ramsha as directors for a new 1-year term?
I'll make that motion. It's Laura.
Laura Bell, and a seconder,
I'll second that. It's Scott.
Scott Meakin, and all those in favor? Anyone opposed? So the motion is passed. And welcome to Elizabeth and Ramsha as new official members of the Board of Living Lakes. I'm now going to hand over to Kat for her executive director's report.
She's muted.
Unmute. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, good evening and welcome, and thank you for attending our AGM. The freshwater ecosystem programs implemented by Living Lakes Canada include water monitoring, analysis, data management, outreach, and education. To do this work, we have a dedicated team of intrinsically motivated people working to support communities in their efforts to achieve watershed health and water security. The Living Lakes office is based in Nelson, BC, and team members work throughout the Columbia Basin, BC, and other parts of Canada. We continue to feel very privileged to have a volunteer board, water expert advisors, and progressive partners and funders without whom our work simply would not be possible. Looking back on 2023, the scope of our work seems to fall in a few themes which I'll highlight for you. The first theme is working to advance applied reconciliation. All Living Lakes Canada programs are guided by the objective of the First Nation people on whose territory we operate. This guidance is provided through the relationships that have been established over time. Building these relationships is most essential in advancing applied reconciliation through our work in community and ecosystem climate resilience. The Columbia Basin Water Monitoring Framework is carrying out surface water, groundwater, and climate monitoring with the guidance and collaboration of First Nations across the Columbia Basin region. In partnership with the Upper Nicola Band, we co-developed a framework to align Indigenous knowledge and Western Science DFO protocol for lake surveying projects. We developed a new water portal focused on Indigenous data sovereignty for the Nicola Governance Watershed Partnership, which is now set to launch. In 2023, we facilitated dialogues for a better understanding of lake stewardship with Yukon Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups. In collaboration with the government of the Yukon, we explored existing and future lake monitoring options across the territory involving members of 9 First Nations and Indigenous groups from the Yukon and from northern BC. In addition to these previous initiatives, we were invited to deliver a range of water monitoring training to 5 nations and subsequently trained 44 Indigenous monitors, as well as working with 14 different First Nations to support youth projects. The second theme is promoting water literacy through media and citizen science program expansion. The adage that you can't manage what you don't measure is only partly true. We also need to understand why it's important as it relates to source water protection and building community adaptive management strategies. Earned media is an opportunity to explain the serious nature of climate change and human impacts to the health and viability of the water-based ecosystems upon which we depend. And to this end, our media coverage tracked 348 instances of media releases in 2023 on various media platforms across Canada. The National Lake Blitz Citizen Program has grown tenfold, with volunteers monitoring 209 lakes in 11 of 13 provinces and territories. Participants of all ages helped collect over 15,000 observations through the Lake Blitz monitoring season, and for a total of 22,000 observations collected since the Lake Blitz program began in 2021. We also had 22 separate youth initiatives involving 712 people between the ages of 12 and 29. The third theme is understanding climate impacts in the Columbia Basin by monitoring streams, lakes, and groundwater to use in a replicable template for other regions. And Paige will be presenting you the details of this work, but in the meantime, here are a few highlights. The Columbia Basin Water Monitoring Framework now monitors an area of 12,500 square kilometers, with Living Lakes and other partners operating 123 monitoring sites. This includes a 105% increase in tributary hydrometric monitoring and a 425% increase in groundwater monitoring. In 2023, 170 individuals joined community meetings to share water concerns, priorities, and values, which helped to guide our monitoring site selections. We also hosted 5 student groundwater labs that provided hands-on experience to 141 college students. So Jane covered this, and in 2023, we were fortunate enough to have our stewardship efforts recognized by 5 awards, and Jane had mentioned 3, and I'll just mention 2 others. One was the recognition that was of our water stewardship legacy over the past 2 decades. We were awarded the Mitchell Award of Distinction and the Community Award by the BC Achievement Foundation, as well as the Conservation Leadership Award from the Kootenay Conservation Program. So moving forward into 2024, the continued repetitive events of drought and forest fires keep decision makers in a reactionary cycle. The efforts needed to protect source water and to restore watershed health are enormous, and so are the costs. So it is essential that collective efforts are not siloed nor duplicated. These challenges also provide an opportunity to forge new working relationships for collaborative problem solving. This year, we're working to improve our cross-sector engagement. We will invest more deeply in our existing relationships and build new partnerships for water stewardship. We have already begun expansions for our groundwater monitoring programs with new partnerships in the Oldman River watershed. We are currently working with BGE, a Calgary-based engineering firm, to test technology co-developed by the Danish government for groundwater mapping on the Piikani First Nation lands, with oversight from an expert committee of academic and technical advisors. In summary, 2023 has been a great year. We've won awards and grown program areas, and this is gratifying work. But my personal reflections are that the water crisis has become more pressing than ever. It's humbling to understand that we've barely scratched the surface of what is needed to support community and ecosystem resilience. The Canadian Public Trust Doctrine requires governments to hold and protect vital natural resources, such as drinking water and fish, for the benefit of present and future generations. We have these future generations working within Living Lakes. They are energetic, motivated, creative, and engaged in their optimistic efforts to shift the paradigms necessary to address our climate and biodiversity crisis. Living Lakes Canada is here to provide a platform for their work. Thank you.
Thanks, Kat. I'll just draw attention, all of Kat's presentation and the financial statements that Brian presented will be available online in on our impact report. And Yulia is going to upload the link to the chat box now for that too, if you want to do a slightly deeper dive into any of the information presented. Now I'd like to introduce Paige Thurston, our Columbia Basin Water Monitoring Framework Manager, and Maggie Finkel-O'Coin, the Living Lakes Database Manager. They are going to present our featured presentation, which is You Can't Manage What You Can't Measure. our monitoring work and regional data hub in the Columbia Basin. Over
Thank you
to
so
you.
much, Jane. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. It's so great to see so many people here, and we are really looking forward to sharing our work with you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the lands that this initiative takes place on are the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa, Lheidli, Secwepemc, Sinixt, and Syilx nations, who have stewarded these lands and waters for generations. My name is Paige Thurston. I'm the program manager for the Columbia Basin Water Monitoring Framework, and I'm joined today by Maggie Finkel-Lecoyne, our GIS and database manager. We'll begin the presentation by providing some insights into how climate change impacts are manifesting here in the Columbia Basin and the need to track these changes. From there, we will introduce the Columbia Basin Water Monitoring Framework. We'll highlight some of the data being collected and how it's being used by communities, and we'll discuss how this data can be used to inform modeling and decision-making tools. Lastly, Maggie will provide an overview of the Columbia Basin Water Hub database and where regional databases like this fit within the broader data landscape in Canada. So over the last several decades, a series of studies and reports produced by the Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium, the Columbia Basin Trust, and others have highlighted water management concerns in the Columbia Basin amidst intensifying climate impacts and the need for expanded monitoring to fill data gaps and to allow communities to prepare for change. So before we go too far here, what exactly does climate change look like in a mountainous region like this? We're in what's called a snow-dominated system. So at high elevations during the winter, water is stored in snowpack. Water is also stored in glaciers. That water melts and is released slowly over the course of the spring, summer, and fall, providing a consistent source of cool, fresh water to communities and ecosystems. But with warmer temperatures, winter precipitation increasingly falls as rain rather than as snow, reducing the amount of water that is stored. Warmer temperatures also cause earlier and faster melting in the springtime, sometimes resulting in flooding. This decreased snowpack, combined with a more rapid melt and diminishing glaciers, means that there is less water remaining for release later in the year, resulting in low stream flows and drought conditions. We've already begun to see the effects of climate change on communities and ecosystems here in the basin. In 2023, the record wildfire and drought conditions had devastating consequences, including home losses, damaged infrastructure, intensifying water restrictions, and low water levels in streams, lakes, wetlands, and aquifers. This past winter, we've seen a lower than average snowpack across the province and here in the Columbia Basin, with drought effects expected to continue this year. At the same time as these impacts are occurring, there have been significant declines in government-run monitoring activities in the region, with most remaining monitoring efforts occurring on larger systems, including those used for flood control and hydropower operations. At this point, there is not enough water and climate data available for this region to support local climate adaptation. So in response to the need for more data, Living Lakes Canada has led the development of the Columbia Basin Water Monitoring Framework and the associated Columbia Basin Water Hub. The monitoring framework is a coordinated water and climate monitoring network that is grounded in the need to track climate impacts on freshwater in the Columbia Basin. This monitoring network is accompanied by a centralized water database, the Columbia Basin Water Hub, which Maggie will discuss later on. So in 2022, Living Lakes piloted this approach in 3 subregions of the basin. Those are shown here in purple on the map. We have the Mid-Columbia Kootenay Hydrologic Region, the Columbia Kootenay Headwaters Hydrologic Region, as well as the Elk River Valley, where we work in partnership with the Elk River Alliance, and this is part of the Upper Kootenay Hydrologic Region. In 2023, the Lower Columbia Kootenay, shown here in blue, as well as the remaining areas of the Upper Kootenay Hydrologic Region were added to the program, with the intention to expand this program to include the rest of the basin in the coming years. So in each area that we implement this program, we carry out a data gap analysis to understand where monitoring is already occurring and how we can best complement the existing network. At the same time, we engage with local community members. To date, over 250 individuals have participated in our public engagement process over the last several years to share their water concerns and priorities. Participants include representation from First Nations, NGOs, all levels of government, academia, and the private sector. So we use both of these factors to prioritize and select monitoring sites. The result is a nested monitoring network which addresses both scientific data gaps and local priorities and concerns. From there, we collaborate with local partners to establish the required monitoring. Living Lakes Canada and partners are now operating 144 monitoring sites across the Columbia Basin. We monitor all parts of the water cycle, from weather and snowfall to stream flow to water storage in lakes, wetlands, and groundwater aquifers. We know that long-term records are required to best contribute to modeling and climate change trend analysis, and we intend to operate this network for a minimum of 10 years to secure these long-term data sets. But valuable information can still be obtained from the data in the near term. We're also excited to share that this innovative approach to establishing a water monitoring network was recently featured as a case study in the journal Water International, as an example which can serve as a model for the development of similar networks in river basins across the globe. I think someone will put the link to that article in the chat here as well if you'd like to have a look at it. So once the monitoring sites are established, there are numerous ways that the data can be used. I'll now highlight a couple of sites and watersheds that are being monitored through the program to demonstrate some of the use cases for the data and share the stories behind these monitoring sites. So we'll begin by looking at Bonanza Creek in the Slocan Valley. It's shown on the map here. This hydrometric site was established in 2023 in collaboration with the Slocan Lake Stewardship Society. This monitoring site is strategically positioned within our broader network. As you can see here, we're also monitoring lake levels upstream on Slocan Lake, as well as upstream on Summit Lake, downstream on Slocan Lake. We're monitoring stream flow on several other tributaries to Slocan Lake. We have high elevation lake ecosystem studies at 2 subalpine lakes, and we also have a nearby high elevation climate station, which is operated with support from Valhalla Mountain Touring. I'll now welcome Wendy King of the Slocan Lake Stewardship Society to just share a few words about how all of this monitoring contributes to their own restoration and stewardship objectives.
Thank you, Paige, and thanks to Living Lake Canada to give me an opportunity to say a few words here. Over the past 5 years, the Slocan Lake Stewardship Society has been expanding our stewardship focus to all levels of the watershed and more encompassing landscape view. By relating water, forests, and species and habitats as interdependent ecosystems for sustainability, we started at one of our priority areas, which is the Bonanza Biodiversity Corridor, as you see here. Not only does the corridor have a rich hydrology, it is relatively undeveloped and it provides a critical source of nutrient flow through a series of wetlands in the valley bottom into Slocan Lake. Very important for this upper Columbia Basin watershed and fish habitat. So with the support and funding from Kootenay Connect and Environment Canada, we implemented a series of wetland restorations and established our site monitoring programs. Since then, we've expanded this initial series of work to establishing tributary tent monitoring programs for fish-bearing tributaries in North Slocan, of which there are I think we're up to about 14 sites now, as well as the riparian restorations and species assessments have now expanded additionally to the Slocan River in the south of the Slocan watershed, with funding from Kootenay Connect and Environment Canada. So we're really expanding a lot of our knowledge. The Slocan watershed has over 45 distinct subbasins, and each one has their own characteristics. So comprehensive monitoring is very helpful for this area. The other item that we are participating is in the Lake Blitz, and of course bringing in the young scientists to see what water's all about, which is critically important. But overall, Living Lakes Canada, the framework and the data hub really help groups, small stewardship groups like us, to really to permit us to do citizen science, as well as hired biologists to do water quality measuring, and to collectively compile that in a database that we can use for further analysis. There's no question the hub continues to grow in value, giving us a collective context to work with all our partners and Indigenous groups and a wide range of stakeholders. So we really look at Living Lakes Canada as one of the I guess the best words are leading us with all the monitoring and understanding of our watershed that's critically important as we go forward. I think that's about it.
Thank you, Wendy. It's always so great to hear about the work you're doing, and really glad that we can contribute to it. Wrong way. There we go. So this program is also supporting the Ktunaxa Nation community of Yakanuki in monitoring flows on the Goat River in the Creston Valley, the commercial agricultural center of the Columbia Basin region. Yakanuki are concerned about the cumulative effects of forestry, agriculture, and climate change on the Goat River, as well as on the downstream wetlands, which are their traditional hunting grounds. The Goat River flow monitoring contributes to a project that draws from Indigenous knowledge, water monitoring, and hydrologic modeling to present and plan for alternative land use scenarios. Looking now to a different part of the water cycle, we'll look at one of our snow survey sites. So beginning in 2013, a local community-based monitoring program, originally known as the North Kootenay Lake Water Monitoring Program, began conducting water and climate monitoring at the north end of Kootenay Lake near Caslow, BC, to better understand the complex hydrology of the region and to track changes due to climate change. These monitoring sites are now part of the Columbia Basin Water Monitoring Framework. One of these sites, the Purcell Snow Survey location, is representative of the Gar Creek watershed in Johnson's Landing. In 2012, a fatal mudslide devastated the Johnson's Landing community, highlighting our lack of understanding of watersheds in the region and motivating local scientists to learn more about them to improve the safety of residents. The data collected at this Purcell site contributes critical snowpack information to the provincial snow database and is used for flood forecasting, water resource management, and to produce the BC government's monthly snow survey and water supply bulletins. The most recently released Snow Survey and Water Supply Bulletin report shows the snow water indices across the subbasins of the Columbia are between 65 and 77% of normal, with several stations in the region showing record low values for May 1st. These important bulletins are a great example of our data being used to inform water management and emergency preparedness. Turning our attention now to groundwater, Living Lakes Canada began monitoring groundwater in 2017, and these observation wells are now part of the CBWMF program. We've been monitoring a groundwater well near Windermere since 2018. So looking at the graphs here, in particular at the graph on the top, we can see that there is a seasonal trend with water levels rising and falling each year. We can also see that aquifer levels in March of this year were lower than levels in March of previous years. Looking at the data chronologically below, we can see that there is an overall decreasing trend in water levels since we began monitoring. To help characterize the groundwater system in this area, in 2021, Living Lakes contracted the development of a 3D hydrogeological model of the area. Recently, the province of BC used the Windermere area for their Water Science Series research project on groundwater modeling because of the availability of groundwater level data and the ability to build on the conceptual model that Living Lakes had previously commissioned. We've recently completed our spring round of groundwater monitoring site visits, and we will be releasing an update on groundwater levels across our network later this month. Additionally, with growing concerns about groundwater supply, we are aiming to complete an aquifer assessment in the Columbia Basin this year. We're currently running a study to better understand community groundwater concerns to inform and support this assessment. If you're a resident of the basin and are concerned about how drought and other impacts are affecting groundwater in the region, you are welcome to complete the survey using the QR code shown here on the screen, or there will also be a link shared in the chat. Give everyone a moment in case they want to take a snap of that QR code. So the data that's being collected through this program is becoming increasingly necessary as climate conditions rapidly change. In situations where there's little or no data available, decision makers often turn to models to predict how a watershed may behave. And while models are very useful tools, they do not always accurately represent what is happening in reality. As an example of this, the Kootenay Boundary Water Tool was developed by the BC Ministry of Forests to provide information on water supply, existing water rights, and environmental flow needs on rivers and streams in our region. This tool was a major advancement in being able to understand flows within unmonitored streams through the Columbia Basin. But due to the data gaps that exist, small to medium-sized watersheds were underrepresented in the data that was used to develop the model. So the Kootenay Boundary Water Tool reports acknowledge that while the model performs relatively well across the region, the predictions for small watersheds may be less accurate due to the lack of hydrometric data that was available. So we've recently compared stream flow measured at 12 of our sites in 2023 to the Kootenay Boundary Water Tools modeling results for the same sites or same watersheds, and found that there was considerable variation between the model and observed conditions. The largest difference observed is between the peak flow timing. So monitoring results showed that in 2023, streams peaked at least a month before the model represented peak flows. So we can see that here with streams peaking in May, where the model showing them peaking in June. And the tool also struggled to accurately represent flows during the low flow period. A full report on this analysis will be released later this month. 2023 was certainly an anomalous year, and we are only looking at 1 year of data, so caution must be taken when drawing these comparisons. But these results do highlight the need to support modeling with current and locally relevant data to ensure that decision makers have access to accurate information. Modeling tools and things like AI technologies to support decision-making are advancing and can be very powerful tools in water management. Yet, however sophisticated these tools are, they cannot replace actual monitoring for 2 reasons. Firstly, models need to be calibrated using real data that is representative of the streams being modeled. If we're modeling small streams, we need to use actual data from smaller watersheds. And secondly, we can't rely on historic data sets to build models. With climate impacts rapidly changing watershed behavior, the past can no longer be used to predict the future. We need current data to reflect how conditions are changing over time. Data provided by this program will help to improve the accuracy and precision of models used for planning and decision making. And to make that data available for these purposes, all of the data that we collect is shared through our open source database, the Columbia Basin Water Hub. And from here, I'll invite Maggie to share some more information with us about that tool.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paige. So the Columbia Basin Water Hub is our freshwater open database here in the Columbia Basin, which was launched in 2021. Since our launch, we have seen many successes. So locally in the Columbia Basin, prior to the development of the Water Hub, water data was often held on private computers or even on paper and was at risk of being lost. And the Water Hub was developed as a safe and secure place to house this data and make it widely accessible. Our ultimate hope for the Water Hub was to provide decision makers, researchers, and communities and others with the data necessary to develop an understanding of the watershed and how to make informed choices that benefit both the environment and communities. We are now seeing this hope become a reality as our data is being used as a resource when it comes to water management decisions, and it is being integrated into a province-wide salmon habitat model being developed by the Pacific Salmon Foundation. And these are just a couple of examples of use cases of the Water Hub data in action. Our successes come from working directly with a variety of different contributors across sectors, including on data management, data upload, and data sharing. So in doing so, we have created really strong relationships with the groups that are conducting water monitoring projects here in the basin. In November, we were honored to receive the Canadian Open Data Quality Award from the Canadian Open Data Society. And this award was a valuable acknowledgement of the work that we have invested in standardizing our templates, our quality assurance practices, our data grading schema, and making the data machine readable, which is all, these all really play a pivotal role in our platform's success. And it was also a really great recognition of the important work that community water stewardship groups are doing here in the basin. We have also continued to see a steady growth over the last 3 to 4 years of observation. So the Water Hub now hosts over 386 data sets, which have been collected from more than 50 contributing organizations. And these organizations include water stewardship groups, academia, industry, and municipal and regional governments. And you can see in this graph here on the screen that we have displayed a consistent level of growth over the last several years. This growth is really in large part due to the dedication that we have when it comes to maintaining community relationships and building trust with our contributors through our one-to-one approach. To get just a little bit deeper into these numbers, we can see that we host more than 6.8 million data points from over 831 unique resources, and all of that falls within those 386 data sets. And this includes historical and current data from various organizations, as I mentioned, in the basin, alongside our own Living Lakes program data. So through the collaboration that we've had with community-based water monitoring groups across Canada, we've come to the realization that there is a need for regional scale databases that closely mirror our own. Groups from Alberta, Vancouver Island, Yukon, and others have voiced their interest in data hubs that enable them to centralize their data storage, better manage water monitoring efforts in their region, and uphold ownership and governance over their data. Following the success of the Water Hub in the Columbia Basin, Living Lakes was selected by the Nicola Watershed Governance Partnership, or the NWGP, which is a collaboration between the province of British Columbia and the 5 Nicola Nation governments, to assist them in creating their own data portal. This partnership has played an important role in our recognition of the value in these regional scale databases. By using our own experience in building a data portal, we have been able to help the NWGP successfully navigate this technical process. So we play a pivotal role in bridging the communication gap between the NWGP and the web developers, which facilitates a clear and effective exchange of ideas and requirements during the CCAN database development process. We really believe wholeheartedly in the advantages of regional scale databases over more traditional large-scale databases. They can provide enhanced data governance options for data owners, allowing them to maintain control over how their data is shared and retaining full ownership rights over their data. And this ensures that adherence to fair data principles, as well as other data management principles, such as the First Nations principles of the OCAP and CARE data principles for Indigenous data governance, can be met by these portals. In contrast to larger scale options, regional databases offer a more specialized approach to water data management, enabling a deeper level of detail that corresponds to local priorities and specific challenges. They focus on facilitating informed decision-making, resource management, and research efforts at the regional level. And a few additional benefits include the facilitation of deeper community engagement. So we have really seen firsthand how when we work on a regional scale, we build relationships with contributors, we see these benefits reflected in the data quality from these community-based water monitoring groups, as well as their engagement with the portal itself. And finally, I think it's really important to note here that with regional databases, if best practices for data sharing are adhered to, broader scale data accessibility is still an option, as the data can be harvested and integrated into other data portals and systems. So a couple examples of this kind of accessibility are the new integrations that we have built with Pacific Data Stream Portal. So Elk River Alliance's data is now fully accessible through their platform. We are planning on offering this option for all of our users in the near future. And another one is that you can also now find our entire data repository on the Canadian Water Information Network's federated search page. As we look forward to the next steps for both the Columbia Basin Water Monitoring Framework and the Water Hub, a priority for the CBWMF and the Water Hub will be continuing to collect and share high-quality long-term data sets. As the length of records grow for each site year after year, we will be able to carry out additional analysis and draw more conclusions from the data. From this, we will be producing resources to support decision makers and the public in interpreting the data to support watershed stewardship and water supply management. Continuing to build strong relationships with project partners and communities where we work is definitely a key priority. And the programs that are being created here in the Columbia Basin are also intended to serve as templates which can be adopted in other regions. So we are currently assisting other communities and organizations in implementing their own regional databases that suit their needs and exploring options for implementing the CBWMF methodology to other river basins. And with that, I want to thank you all so much for your time. And at this point, I will pass it back over to Jane to open the floor for questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much, Paige and Maggie. That was excellent. I love seeing how these things are getting used on a day-to-day basis. I would like to open the floor up to questions. I see there is one in there's a couple in the chat already, but people can also raise their hands if they would like. I've just got one here. Can you interpret the graph for me? What issues are highlighted by the modeling and the monitoring station or monitoring stats as highlighted in your presentation?
Sure. Do you want me to bring the graph back up? Is that helpful?
I would, yeah.
Okay. There we go. Yeah, looking at the graph here, the blue bars in the columns here, these are the modeled data from the Kootenay Boundary Water Tool, and then the purple diamonds here show the data that we measured in 2023. So we can see here there's a difference in the timing of flow here. So we observed the peak flow happening in May versus June. A month's difference in peak flow is fairly significant for, looking at things like flood management or, whatever it may be in the watershed of concern. And then the other concern here is in the quantities. So here the tool is projecting significantly higher stream flow than what we actually measured. So, that can have an impact on things like maybe decision-making for water licensing or, how that water is able to be used. So really important that we have access to accurate information when we're making decisions about these watersheds. Does that answer the question?
I hope so. It answers it for me.
Great.
Yeah. And then I've got another one here in the chat box. What do you see as your biggest challenges moving forward for your program?
One's direct to the framework. Interesting question. I mean, I think the consistency is really the key here. We really need to continue to generate high quality data consistently. If we have gaps in the data, that's going to impact how it can be used and those types of things. So that's the key priority right now, is just to continue to operate what we've established and make sure that the quality is there.
I have one for you, Paige. I just wondered if you have a way of measuring the ripple effect that you guys have with your monitoring, how your information is being used, and is it just a matter of how many clicks you get on your website, or is it like, how do you have a way of measuring that?
Yeah, that's a great question. A couple of key factors there. The first is that we have really close relationships with our data users in many cases. Because we've developed this network in collaboration with the people that we anticipate will be using the data. In many cases, we know, exactly who's waiting on that data, what they're planning to do with it, and we're in close contact with them, providing regular updates on what we're seeing and what it might mean for their operations. So that's definitely one piece. Continuing to gather those stories from data users and collaborators. And then secondly, with the Water Hub, we do have digital object identifiers, or DOI, that allow us to track how the data is used. Maybe Maggie, you can expand on that.
Yeah, thank you, Paige. So each one of the data sets on the Water Hub is assigned a digital object identifier through the Canadian Knowledge Consortium of Canada. So these digital identifiers allow us to be able to track any citations that may be occurring of our data as they're used in more official publications. So that's one way that we can track that data. And, with the Water Hub, we're looking at other ways to be able to understand what data sets are being downloaded when, to be able to better follow up on data usage.
Are there any other questions? And either about the presentation or about financial statements or the executive director's report. This can be a general Q&A time as well, or about the organization and where it's going.
I do see a question in the chat here. Do we pay for the DOIs for the data sets? We currently do maintain a membership with DataCite Canada. There is a fee associated with it, but it has been subsidized in the past, and we've been really lucky on that regard. But it is of such value for our data sets to be able to track this kind of information, so it's well worth the cost for us.
I've got another one here that maybe I will put to Andy. Is Living Lakes hiring?
That's a great question. I'd love to understand where that came from, but yeah, we're always looking for great people to help us in our endeavors. If you think you want to be a part of this fantastic organization, then you can drop a CV to info@livinglakescanada.ca. We'll always be interested in reviewing that and keeping those options on file.
Great. Any other questions? Oh, are decision makers using the data?
I can speak to this first, and maybe I'll hand it over to Paige. But we've had a lot of conversations, especially within the provincial government, to understand, how the Water Hub is being used, and to ensure that we're kind of positioning ourselves as a resource whenever it comes to decision making. At this stage, we know that we've had conversations with the water authorization team, and we know that the data that is on the hub is being used as a resource. So in a roundabout way, we can say, yes, tracking direct data to direct decision is always a challenge across, data management and things like that. But we're definitely moving in the right direction for ensuring that our data is really making a change out there.
That's a great answer, Maggie. I think, as we continue to generate, additional years of data, the use cases for it are just going to continue to grow, and the possibilities are quite endless. So it's really exciting to think about.